Sure. Okay, we're going to call the meeting to order. This is the work session of the Oregon City Commission. And have the roll call, please.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Here.
Commissioner Rachel Lau Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Denise McGriff.
Present.
And Mayor Dan Holliday hopefully will be joining us soon.
Okay. So I think the first item up is the Willamette Falls Legacy Project. Mr. Conkle.
Thank you, Commissioner Lau Smith. Evening, Commissioners. So tonight we're here to have a work session with representatives from Willamette Falls Trust as well as Biederman Redevelopment Ventures to talk about the Willamette Falls Legacy Project and specifically the Riverwalk programming. So as you recall, part of the Riverwalk vision is not only a world-class Riverwalk experience, but also the programming. How do we activate that space to the same caliber that we want for the Riverwalk and the development adjacent to that? And so as part of these discussions, it's been talking about how do we create a world-class programmed experience on the site. So you can imagine, and you've received work session updates before on some of the work when we talk about, when we started the visioning process, essentially is what do you want to see on this property 20 years from now when it's finished? What kind of experiences? What kind of art? What kind of culture? How does it change with the season? How does it make it an interesting place that's used year round and provide that activity out there? And some of the work that we've done, and we did really appreciate the work from Willamette Falls Trust that really took the lead on working on what world-class programming along this linear experience could be. And so tonight we're here to begin the discussion about, as part of the Riverwalk, what we've talked about is that Metro would be responsible for the habitat areas. They have the experience and the staff to take care of that part of the Riverwalk, and that Oregon City would be responsible for essentially the hardscape. So whether it's the police presence, the utilities, but also the programming of the site and the maintenance of the site. And so in discussions with Willamette Falls Trust, we began discussing the ability for, and there are models like this throughout the country, where a nonprofit such as Willamette Falls Trust would come in and really supplement, lead, take over the programming component of that, either solely or in cooperation with the city. And so tonight I'd like to invite representatives from the Willamette Falls Trust, but specifically Ashley Langworthy, the director of the Western Region for Biederman Redevelopment Ventures, to come up and kind of talk about some of the work that they've been doing as it relates to how we could program this site and what a relationship between the city and Willamette Falls Trust could look like.
Okay, thank you. So while our visitors come up, I will make a note for the record that Mr. Mayor Holliday has joined us, and so he can take over the meeting.
And I apologize for my tardiness.
Great. Good evening, Commissioners. Thanks for having me. I presented back in June.
You are?
Ashley Langworthy with Biederman Redevelopment Ventures.
Andrew Mason, Willamette Falls Trust.
So as I was saying, I was in front of you back in June, shared a presentation of the types of programming that we do in other parks that we manage and oversee. So I oversee a park in San Francisco and consult on other park and public space projects in California, Texas, Oregon, other states around the Western U.S. And we were hired back in April of last year by the Trust to come up with a programming plan, recommendations for the Riverwalk, and help advise on the design and also advise on some other matters such as management and governance of the Riverwalk. And so at this point, we are wrapping up our programming plan. We have a lot of great detail on showcasing all the wonderful things of the Riverwalk, on showcasing all the stories that are embedded in the site, the cultural and historical components, ecological parts of the site related to the core values, and creating a great space there. And so what I was here to talk about tonight, you received the staff report in the letter around oversight and management of the Riverwalk. So what we see from an outsider's perspective, and having managed and advised on many parks and public spaces across the country, is that you have something really, really incredible here, and we're so honored to be part of it. The potential is huge, and they're going to be, there's very high standards and high expectations around this Riverwalk and the programming that is part of it. So what we see is that there needs to be a group to oversee it and to manage it that can showcase and rise to those really high standards and be very nimble and flexible, and be able to deliver on this programming that will be an incredible part of this site. And we expect it to really be, it's going to be a huge asset for the city, but also a regional draw, and really even national, Western U.S. and national draw for visitors to the city and to the Riverwalk. And so in order to oversee it and to manage it, there will have to be dedicated staff and resources, and the ability to bring in revenues to sustain these goals. And as stated in the letter, what we see, we recommend nonprofit oversight and management, specifically with the trust, we think is the best way forward to meeting all these expectations and goals for the site. With dedicated staff and dedicated resources. We also think for the city that this will be beneficial, cost-effective, and fiscally responsible in terms of being able to put your resources in into the Riverwalk, but to the trust and such with other means to bring in money through philanthropy and other ways of generating money on revenue on site, can really make that a very robust programming and operations for the Riverwalk. We see them being able to partner with local organizations and businesses to provide the programming on site, and we really see that this will also boost the surrounding retail and tourism and economic development of Oregon City. There will have to be details that are worked out so that there's clear accountability and that you all feel comfortable from the city side. And we would likely recommend that there's a board that has members from the city, as well as others, as outlined in the letter, to oversee the nonprofit management meetings, say quarterly, to give oversight and overall direction. And those agreement terms would also, clearly set out expectations, roles, and responsibilities, and so forth. Andrew, are you gonna?
Yeah, so this is, we're at a process here of where the trust has explored a variety of other parks around the country, and certainly is working with Biederman Redevelopment to come up with the plan to be able to execute on what thousands of Oregonians have told us through the process of getting community input now over many years, and then what we've learned in terms of best practice parks programming. And so our board, through a process of doing our due diligence, certainly stands ready to take on this responsibility if we deem that it's appropriate or not. And we're excited to engage in further conversation as you see fit.
Other questions?
Sorry. So I assume this is just a preview. What are next steps? Is this a chance for us to ask questions and you're going to show up at the next meeting with a contract, or we're a long way from that? Like, where are we at in the process? So I can try to...
So this is the first, obviously, discussion about thinking about how do we program the site over the long term, knowing what the expectations are for that programming. And if this is, an option that the commission is interested in, we would continue to then work with and engage with the trust to start to flush out the details of what a potential agreement between the city and the trust could look like. So it's really to get the first thoughts from the commission about this as an alternative for programming on the site. If there are questions tonight, we'll be happy to try to answer those tonight, whether it's myself, Andrew, or Ashley, or, to be able to come back with questions at a later date. It's really to try to start to see if this is an option that the commission is interested in further studying and looking into to try to work towards an agreement.
Commissioner Smith.
This is a huge topic. So one of the things that I'm concerned about is, because it is such a big topic and big project and so many moving parts and so many agencies in both the Riverwalk piece and the other piece of the entire site, but that we're all on the same page when we start, which is going to be really hard to do. And we know that all these different agencies and entities have different goals and different priorities. We need to have as much buy-in with all the components before we move into a process. So even a process like this where we're talking about programming, if we don't have the dialogues that need to happen early on, we risk not getting support from crucial groups or crucial entities that we need support from, which could, as we all know, defeat the entire purpose of starting in the first place. So if this is in what our thinking, it seems to be, the Riverwalk is essentially going to be a park. It's going to be a city park, and the infrastructure is essentially a city park. The green spaces may be a metro, maintained, and then we're talking about the programming piece. If the city of Oregon City was going to have any sort of a dialogue about management of a city park, that dialogue would not happen until it was fully discussed with the PRAC, with the Parks and Recreation Advisory Commission or Council. So it seems like their buy-in is crucial to how are we managing a city park. If we haven't talked to Parks and Rec Advisory, we need to make sure that if the programming component, which we all believe and you mentioned, is so tied with economic development, then to what component are economic development staff, tourism staff involved in this dialogue of programming? If we aren't on the same page, and the city has a mission in going forward in one way with tourism or one way with economic development, and that's not the same direction that the trust is going in, then we've failed from the beginning. So it's crucial that that is all in sync, which I've never seen happen in this town. I think we can get there. I think we're getting closer to that, but we have to do everything to make sure that we are making sure that those connections are happening. So I think that it's too overwhelming, really, to think that the city parks department is going to run that whole Riverwalk. I don't think any of us think that's possible. So clearly there's got to be some sort of partnership. But we just need to make sure that we're going through the right steps. So I'm really open to the dialogue continuing, but I think it needs to start at community level too, so there's a buy-in there, because without that, we're not going to move forward in the way that we all want to. The other concern that I have is the programming itself. In the presentation that I recall that you made, was it in the summer?
Yeah, in June, correct.
And I think, is one of the parks in Seattle?
Yes, we did work on Occidental Square.
Right.
Yeah, in Seattle.
So I've been to that park. It's a beautiful park. And my worry is in terms of the presentation that we saw was if you go to a park like that in Seattle and you haven't been to a park like that before, you're like, wow, this is a really unique park. It's got these programming pieces of games out on the street, and it's got this activity happening, and it's really kind of unique. In fact, the first time that I saw the park in Seattle, I thought just that. But then, when you look at all the other projects in all the other cities, they're the same. So if you take, and what I mean by that is it's almost like these programming pieces with colored chairs and some games and like yoga and various programming pieces, which looks to most of us that go to Chapin Park and then go to something like that, wow, this is a really active park. There's a lot of community buy-in and it's got this great feel. But then you look at all the 10 or 20 or whatever many parks across the United States that are also unique. They're all the same as each other. There's nothing, and I think there's a balance, obviously, of having the program tied to an audience that's not necessarily just about history, right? The audience that we all, want to see, I think, come to the Riverwalk is interested in history and culture and whatever. We know that doesn't mean that all the programming on that site needs to be that. But there has to be a real balance between bringing the non-historic or the people that are not interested in that tourism piece down to the site, like to exercise or to play, a large chess game. So I see that as a component, but if that's the entire identity of the place, then it's lost the uniqueness of that site. And so I think we have to be very careful with that. And I think the less we're comfortable with that, the less likely you're going to see the city say, oh, we hand over programming to you. Because if we hand over programming to something outside the city, and then at some point we realize that the visions are different, that's going to be an issue. And so the way we intertwine this in all aspects is crucial to making it work. And there's so many of us that are so excited about this project that we want to do everything perfectly, which we're not going to do. But I just think, tying in those other pieces and early in the process is going to help us move forward. And I would love to be able to see some sort of partnership for the programming piece. I'm reluctant to see the city just turning over management to something we've just spent, 10 or 15 years trying to put together for ourselves. Right? And what I mean is for ourselves, it's this whole region. But we have all worked so hard on this, and everyone in this room has worked so hard on this, that we have to do it right.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
So I'll try not to be repetitive of what Commissioner Smith said. I am open to the concept. I think the reports that were furnished to this commission were excellent, explaining both the pros and the cons of this approach. Obviously, I'll refer to them as the trust is in favor of this type of management going forward. It makes them the managing entity with Biederman reporting to them at their direction. Is that correct?
For the long-term management, our contract is to help get it set up, but not necessarily for the long term.
Right,
Yeah.
but initially you would act at their direction.
Yes.
Okay, and it also gives that entity the power to enter into contracts, award leases, et cetera. Is that correct?
Correct.
And I'm listening to what Commissioner Smith says. Biederman has been successful in a number of places. Obviously, they have a formula, a template that works for them, and it needs to be structured and to recognize the unique characteristics of this area. And I trust that you do that with every site that you handle, that it's not the same as, only different. So I question what the role of our economic and tourism managers will be. Are they going to be advisory? I mean, that is integral to our success in this community. And quite honestly, what this needs is a coordination. And I think Commissioner Smith touched on it. A coordination with the other offerings that we're going to make from a tourism and economic development perspective, with the falls being the centerpiece. So I think what I said just supplements what Commissioner Smith said, but I'm open to the continued conversation and exploring the possibilities.
Commissioner McGriff.
Well, I will follow your excellent example, Mr. O'Donnell. I read the material, and I think, you've got, staff has come up with, option A, B, C, and of course, I have to find an option D. That's just me. I, like other people in this community, have a significant investment of time in the success of this project, and it's something that I hope to continue to be involved in, whether I'm sitting here or sitting elsewhere. So as we all know, as Rocky and Frank said, that the expectations for this project are high, but I don't want them to be too high that we sort of overshoot everything. So, we're going to shoot high, but we're going to be realistic about that. So I support a partnership, but I am not interested in the city of Oregon City relinquishing its control entirely. We owe that to the community, to our community, because when the bottom line hits, regardless of whether this is a region-wide project and region-wide partners, in the end, it is in Oregon City, it's about Oregon City, and we're going to have to answer to the people of Oregon City. And I feel that we have to do that. So I'm interested in an option D where we work with another entity to manage the program, but that the city maintain, I don't know what percentage, but that we're still in the driver's seat and that things get back. I also agree with your idea. We need to talk to our community. I'm not just interested in what the PRAC has to say, but I'm interested in what our communities has to say. And I think I would like to get some idea of whether they support the idea of looking at a different option for programming, not the specifics, but how we manage that programming. And I would like to see that happen before we enter into any contracts with anybody about how we do this. But I think agreeing with both of the other people that, yes, we should continue talking, and we need to look at a little different entity with Oregon City and our regional partners and the trust. I have no problem about, the trust, but again, as one of our presidents, Mr. Truman, said, the buck is going to stop here. So I want to make sure that we can respond adequately to our constituents, whether they be in the city of Oregon City or they're in Clackamas County or they're in the region. But Oregon City is really where the rubber is going to meet the road.
Commissioner Lyle Smith.
Thank you. So, again, not to repeat, I agree with everything that they have been saying. Because I feel like the design of the Riverwalk has changed, it's not clear to me how much space we're really talking about. When we saw programming examples of other parks, you're talking about big rectangular parks where you could have yoga classes and all of those, dances and kids and all of that. And I have a hard time envisioning that on a river walk that's supposed to be a walk along the river. So I'm trying to get in my mind a scale of the programming that will fit the size and the shape of the project. And maybe that's because maybe some of the designs have changed with the new owner that's come on board and kind of the change in the direction of where the Riverwalk's going. And so, I don't want us to get too far ahead of ourselves. I just want to make sure that the scale of the programming is correct for the area that we have control over. And if it's meant to be where we have more space to do more stuff, I think that's going to be in partnership with the Grand Ronde. And I don't know where they're at as part of these conversations. Maybe not part of these conversations yet as far as the programming and that collaboration of how they would be interested in what we're saying along the Riverwalk about the history and the connection to other things that may happen on the site. So I understand. I do think it may be a good idea to have external programming. I want to be cognizant. The price tag on the for the programming was like $400,000 to $800,000, I believe, a year. That's a substantial amount of money, and so therefore I want to think very seriously about open procurement and not just defaulting to the folks that I know that have been part of this project, but making sure that we're being open to the needs and who has the best qualifications to do the programming that we need. And I don't make that comment to be disparaging of Willamette Falls Trust. I just, I don't know enough about the trust to know, like, are they a programming entity? I know they're a philanthropic entity, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're a programming of a park entity. And so that's just some of my concerns. And so, but I'm certainly open to continuing this conversation and seeing what options we have going forward.
Commissioner O'Donnell.
I'll keep this short. As we explore this further, I'd be interested to see what the deliverables would be from your entity, from Biederman, and I'd like to see that they're measurable deliverables. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see maybe previous contracts that are, don't have names on them. I mean, in my world, your compensation is sometimes tied to your performance. So I don't know if you ever have contracts like that there's a scale of compensation depending on how well you do. I don't want to put a lot of money out and get no results. So we can talk about that in the future. And that's my final comment for the evening. Thank you.
I'll go last like I usually do. I think this is a good start. I do question if the trust is going to be the operator, where do you anticipate the revenue coming from?
So there's probably several streams, and I think what typically happens is these grow over time. So the first year there would not be self-sustaining revenues that would cover all the operations, maintenance, and programming and such. So I think part of it would continue to be philanthropic dollars, but on site, it would be through concessions, food and beverage. It would be from private event rentals. So if someone wants to, say, have a wedding on the site or a corporate retreat or such, there's likely opportunities for sponsorship. So this might be local businesses kind of sponsorships, or maybe, there's a company or such from the greater region that wants to, say, sponsor I'm just throwing an idea, but summer film festival or something. Then there could be opportunities from, say, if there's film and photo shoots on the site. I mean, it's a gorgeous site. We're, as part of our recommendations, have given several things to look at and evaluate as we get closer to a phase 1 plan and a eventual, full build-out plan.
Sure. And I guess my last statement is that while I understand the concerns of some of the other commissioners, we haven't structured this yet. So there's still a lot of opportunity to figure out what the structure might be. And I think there could be an interim. You could have the Willamette Falls Trust being the funding source, and we could have a combination of members from the trust and the rest of the electeds, whether they be Metro, Oregon City, Clackamas County, or state, be sort of that interim between the trust and this organization, so that the electeds, the people that actually answer to the people, have some control over that. So I would kind of look at maybe that kind of a model to make sure that we're retaining, control of the operations and maintenance. And obviously, this is going to belong to Oregon City. So there's also some technical things that we'll have to do if we're going to call this thing a park. then we have some issues. This will have to be a very special park with a whole new special section of the code or the charter to handle it, because a lot of the things that you've talked about are prevented from happening in a city park right now, such as food carts and concessions and all sorts of other things. So that would be a discussion that the city commission is going to have moving forward, along with the planning commission and the Parks Rec committee, to make sure that we structure that particular park in such a way that we can maximize the revenue and still maintain local control. So with that, Commissioner McGriff.
I have questions. I'm not making a statement.
Okay.
So I have a question for staff. Either Laura or Tony may be able to answer this. So, and maybe Andrew already has some thoughts about this. So I would like to see if there's a possibility of us proceeding with the trust to have some sort of a community meeting. We could kill two birds with one stone, talk about this, get some feedback on how this programming might be acceptable to the community. We don't have to get into super details, but just say we're thinking about programming in a different way. Number two, we can talk about the revision to the plan that's being proposed. So that's the second question. Then number three is, would this change that we're contemplating of where the Riverwalk's going to go, is that going to require a change to the master plan and amendment? And number four is, for the trust, is this new concept, how does that change your mission? Because obviously you've been like the money bags. So, been you, so.
So I guess in relation to, we have an approved design for the Riverwalk.
Right.
Right. Grand Ron has proposed an interim first phase access. And so our roles as staff right now is to work with Grand Ron to ensure that either what's being constructed as part of the interim meets the design guidelines and intent of the adopted plan that the partners in Oregon City has approved, or that it does not preclude the full build out of what we've envisioned. So at this point, we have not changed what the proposed Riverwalk yard is. If there are changes necessary down the road, we'll address that. But right now, we're still working under the plan that's been approved and how we mesh that interim access. Because remember, our initial plan last year was to utilize Main Street. The request was to look at an interim access along the Riverwalk. Now, parts of that can be built to what's envisioned in the adopted Riverwalk master plan, and parts of these are more interim in nature. And so the task we're working on right now is, how does this not preclude implementing what is approved right now? And if there are those conflict points that are significant changes, then we have that discussion about what changes. So when we're working on this and planning and looking at the programming, we're working off of what the adopted plan is, and realizing that programming is just like the Riverwalk, going to come in phases. You know, depending on what we're able to construct with what we're able to afford, is going to somewhat drive some of the programming, realizing that we want to be able to then ramp up to, as the next phase comes in, to be able to program that space as well. So it'll be, you know, we're thinking of this incrementally moving through. So I think that might have answered two questions as it related to the master plan as well as the design.
Anything to add?
I would add to your question number 4 is, in terms of the mission for Willamette Falls Trust, we really are here to champion a world-class Willamette Falls experience. And it's been up to the board to set that direction and what that means. When and so about 2 years ago, we went out to folks to talk about what it would take to make an investment in this project, and we really heard 2 things back from significant investors and philanthropists in the region and beyond. And the 2 things they said were, what's it going to look like in 50 years? Mm-hmm. You know, what's the long-term vision for Willamette Falls? And the other one was, what's going to happen on day one? Because they know that you build something and the action isn't the structure. The action is what happens in that building, and what's going to make this an exciting place is what makes somebody want to come back a second time, and a third time. And so that's where we got the bee in our bonnet to really try and be able to tell the story with a sense of authenticity about what would happen on day one. And that's how we got the programming bee in our bonnet. And we're most invested in that world-class experience. Are we the best qualified organization to do programming? We don't do programming. We haven't done programming. What we are is engaging a philanthropic community investors, and we see what it is that they want to have happen here. And we know it's going to take a lot of lead time if we want to have some comments on the design of the actual hardscape, or if we want to be able to recruit the right partners to be able to develop world-class programming. So we're trying to create a lot of lead time. We stand ready to morph into that organization because we've heard it happen. Do we think we're necessarily it? No. Do we think we're well positioned to be able to serve that? Yeah, we do. And that's what the conversation would be, is what that would look like. And it's part of that due diligence that we were doing when we went and saw other world-class parks on the West Coast, and why we've been working with Biedermann to learn what that might mean.
Because part of that was for the purposes of letting people out in TV land hear this.
Thank you. Hi out there in TV land.
Commissioner O'Donnell?
Final comments. I admire the trust. I admire everything they've done. I just, the questions in my mind are when to enter into this agreement. Do we enter into it early? Do we enter into it when we have a more total packaged offer? Those are things to be determined. I mean, if you enter too early, you're getting no bang for your buck. We actually control a small percentage of the total land mass, and some of those things we talked about, they will require cooperation between ourselves and our major partner, specifically the Grand Ronde Tribe. And there's going to have to be coordination with them because they are the major partner and the major entity. And I don't want to find myself in a position where I'm competing with their offerings. I don't want to alienate that major partner. But I'm for going forward and exploring it because we've got nothing to lose by doing so.
So,
Fantastic.
as a final comment, I would say that if we're talking about maybe a middle organization between the trust and the project, that we could also include a couple of the major philanthropists if they wish to be on that board. And we would also obviously have to connect with Chairwoman Kennedy and the tribes, and they should have at least a person on that board as well. So I think we can go down and kind of find a middle ground to make sure that we have the philanthropic organization working, but we also have the oversight from the major players, and utilizing a company that knows how to operate and maintain these things, I think is a big deal. And to be honest, I don't want to put 6 or 8 people on PERS for Oregon City Parks and Rec to staff this thing when we can do it with a private organization.
Agreed.
So with that, thank you for your time and your attention, and we'll move on to Mr. Lewis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and City Commissioners. We're going to drop down the screen here for a short presentation. We're excited to bring you an update about the Public Works Operations Center. It is an update, so no action needed from you tonight, but we're here to answer questions. We've as you recall, we acquired this site in early 2018. We've done a lot of due diligence. We've been bringing to you small contracts with various professionals, all of which are here represented tonight. Jerry Mulrooney with Plan B, who you have worked with before on the police department. Brandon Dole is with SEA. And in the audience are Sid Scott with SEA, Jordan Fell and Bill Judge with Emmerich, they're in the audience, and Manny, who's with SEA as well, as probably doing all the hard work in the back room, right?
Sure.
So anyway, we're excited about this site. We recognize, we're thankful that the City Commission took action when they did to acquire this site. It is it's a nice site. It's got lots of warehouse space on it. It's about 4.7 acres. You're going to hear that from, I think, Jerry a fair amount, maybe Brandon, but the idea was to move all of Public Works there and bring in Parks Operations. We're still on that track. We're still working through those details, trying to figure out how to get everything to fit on what is a small site. if you remember back when, some of you will remember back when we were really kind of trying to figure out how we could continue to exist, we were looking for much more site, right? Our current site on Center Street is a little bit bigger than this. And really, if we had our druthers, we would have had something more like the Mount Pleasant school site, right? 8 point some acres.
Hell no.
Just stop with that and move on.
I'm over it, believe me.
Apparently not.
Anyway, I just want to emphasize, we think that this facility does a whole bunch for the city and for the 2 departments, but it's a tight fit. We're finding that more and more as we get deeper and deeper into this. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jerry and Brandon.
Before Mr. Mulroney gets started, I do want to say that I've been working with him and the rest of the project team on the police building for the last few months, and they've been doing an outstanding job. We're under budget and ahead of schedule. So thank you for that.
Good.
Thank you. No pressure. Mr. Mayor, members of the commission, good evening. I'm Jerry Mulroney with Plan B Consultancy.
I am Brandon Dole with Scott Edwards Architecture.
So for the next 10 minutes or so, if you can understand my accent, we're going to talk to you. Just project update from our point of view, the design team, and not have John talk too much more about this project. So the idea of our update is just to kind of give you an update of what we've been doing the last couple of months, what the next number of months look forward to, as well as just an update on the design and the current program that we have. So do you want to control the slides and I'll do the talking?
I think I can do that.
There we go. Okay, so initially, just for members of the audience and who are not familiar with the site, 4.7 acres is what we have to work with. The divisions that we are trying to include in this project, you see them listed there, Public Works, Water Storm, Transportation and Fleet. Brandon will talk a bit more about where we plan to house these people and all their equipment. We're also incorporating parks, maintenance and facility maintenance into this project. We also have all the good folks at Public Works transferred from First Street, as well as information technology and the GIS folks. The image you see there is the current site. You can see the square footage of the existing buildings, as well as the office space, I think is roughly about 27,000 square feet. Brandon's going to talk a little bit about the design objectives that we were set when we came on board as part of this project.
So as Jerry already mentioned, we're looking to design an all-inclusive office. And by that we mean we're going to bring in all these different departments that are currently housed throughout the city. So Parks and Rec and Maintenance, engineering from City Hall, and operations from First Street. We're also going to design a site that's operationally efficient. Right? So part of what we've been discussing with Commissioner O'Donnell is the term he uses is the man doesn't wait for the machine and the machine doesn't wait for the man. So within our design, we are trying to get, again, an efficient site. We're also looking at providing an updated vehicle maintenance facility. So this facility would serve the Public Works Department, their fleet, and parks fleet. Very typical with these types of facilities for a city to be able to maintain their own vehicles, which they do now. We're just going to give them a more adequate facility to do such.
Hang on one second. So Chief, what about police? Are we still going to use a separate facility for maintenance on the police vehicles?
We do not use Public Works. We use a different facility completely for all of our vehicles.
But the question is, could we?
Could we?
I think what we're doing right now works better for all of us.
Okay, moving on.
I mean, it's a longer conversation.
It is.
So what we'll go into in a little more detail is actually what the fleet looks like, and that's based on what we're accounting for in that.
Then we don't have a key on this map, so what are the CBs and the DSs?
Oh, you can disregard those. Those are catch basins and downspouts, just existing features of the site.
Right.
Yes.
Can I ask a quick question? Why are we moving GIS and IT? This was a new one for me.
So part of GIS and IT includes quite a bit of work that is directly related to Public Works. So a lot of all of their maintenance slips, how we track what work orders are coming in, any new subdivisions, any new developments. There's a significant amount of coordination that goes between GIS mapping and all of the infrastructure that are in all of our layers of the GIS mapping system and Public Works, not only through new development that comes through engineering review, but also ongoing maintenance and work that's going out in the field. So when we look at that relationship, it's probably one of the most significant work that's going on is between those two departments, and they're actually right next to each other right over here because of the work that they do supporting one another.
So we talking about moving all city servers as well?
No, they're going to PD.
What about community development? Seems to me they do a lot of work with community development as well.
Who does?
GIS and IT.
Well, GIS, I think that GIS does much more work with Public Works and engineering than with community development.
Much of the GIS department is funded through the Public Works Department, so they're actually within the department. We just manage them under a different manager who's general fund. We would like definitely the GIS realm in the engineering group because of all the inner workings that they do. Because of the way they're managed in discussions with the manager of that division, he would like to have some grouping there. So we're going to try to make that fit. I'm going to take over too much.
Yes, you are.
It's fine. It's just new. This is the first time I had seen everything we had heard was Public Works and Parks. And
What I do want to say is that I don't want to get in the middle of Tony's making decisions about where his people are. Oversight of the general project is one thing, but that's certainly a management decision that I don't want to get involved in. So you guys continue ahead.
Thank you.
Okay.
So the final two bullet points on this side is covered storage and parking. So within the yard of the site, we provide steel canopies protecting fleet vehicles and equipment. And then obviously with a 47,000 square foot warehouse, we're going to store parts and pieces and different materials within the warehouse. And the final bullet point says, develop a user-friendly public space, which is a welcoming lobby, reception counters for both engineering and operations to engage in public, coming to them, and just creating a nice place that the local community can use.
The intent obviously is to try and create much space we can use for future expansion as well for each of those divisions, so that we're just transferring people from where they currently are to a new home without future growth. So just some bullet points here. We, as the design team, Scott Edwards, Emmerich, our contractor, ourselves, Plan B, all came on board various stages from August 2019. We went through the normal processes for selection under the city guidelines. Our budget, as you can see, is 11.4. That is for everything, construction, all the soft costs, all the fees for ourselves, the other consultants. Brandon, do you want to talk about the initial site plan options?
Sure. So any project like this, at this scale and public entity, we always look at the initial program alongside with the budget that we're given. So we start off with initial site plan options and budget review, reconciling those two things as a part of our due diligence. Through that effort, in conjunction and working with Emmerich Construction, Plan B, John's team, and ourselves, we quickly understood that we needed to look at revisioning the existing office space. If you recall, the original RFP called to knock this building down and develop a brand new office building. Well, through the efforts in reconciling program and budget, we decided the best use of this money is to repurpose the existing office space. So that from that point on, after that decision was made, we looked at just revisioning this building. We've promised Public Works a new facility, but yet they're looking at this existing building that has had an interesting life Let's just put it there. So part of our effort was doing that, giving them that vision and reassurance that this is indeed going to be an adequate home for these groups that we're bringing together. We've gone through what we call a mind-breaking session, which is basically charrette, open discussion with the larger advisory group. We pair that with a presentation to them, bringing them along through the design process. We will do that throughout. And then just this week, we actually are in the formal land use process. We had our pre-application conference Tuesday, excuse me, today's Wednesday, and all seems well. We went into that knowing some of the challenges that this site presents in trying to meet Oregon City's municipal code.
Which are?
Excuse me?
Give me a couple.
Let us get to the site plan. We'll kind of talk through that 4.7 acres.
And just to kind of reinforce a couple of points there about reusing the existing buildings, I know we want to be good custodians of your budget. Anything that we demo, obviously, we will try and salvage in one capacity or another and reuse. So I know those were things that came up on the PD, and we're trying to carry that same philosophy over into this building as well. So. This slide here, we're just trying to emphasize the point of who's involved in this project. It's not just us and the architects and the contractor. We talked about an advisory group, which is all those folks on the left-hand side of the screen. They're all representative of each of their divisions, so they're engaged with the design as we move through this process. Thankfully, we've got Commissioner O'Donnell as well, who's been attending our recent design meetings, and it's good to have commission involvement at this stage.
That was gracious.
You know, there's a point in time where we're going to be going to the public to inform them. I think that's coming up in the next month or so. We'll come on to that slide. So it's not just us and designers trying to spend your money. We've engaged a lot of folks to date, and we'll continue to do that.
Just real quick, so on the left-hand side, on my left-hand side, you've got members. You said these are all management team people?
These are probably in a more elevated position in each of their divisions. So where does the
rank and file come in to have some comments? Because they're the ones that are going to be
Absolutely. So when we had our initial meeting with each person on the left-hand side, they distilled all the comments, drawings, information back to the rank and file.
So how do they get to talk to you directly is what I'm asking.
We do that through that advisory group presentation. So we have a handful of those identified throughout the design process. Also, SCA has conducted what we call a day in the life of. So we've spent time with individuals in each department. We've gone through and looked at the existing inadequate facilities, which all of you are aware of. And we've also looked at the equipment which is intended to be stored at the facility. So all of those parts and pieces allows for that platform for the members, you know, to convey their wants and wishes.
The only reason I'm asking, just because I've participated in a process like this with a building, and one of the things that my agency did at the time is that they didn't just have the management team on it. They talked to people who were actually doing the physical work and the written work in the office. So we had our advisory team was a combination of people, because even though the manager or the mid-manager is distilling it, something always gets lost in the translation, and it's good to have rank and file participate in this because they're going to be the ones dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. So I think their opinion is valid.
Agreed. Yes. And out of our first advisory group meeting, we've received over 100 comments.
Good.
To which we go through, we filter. Some of that is John and his team's responsibility to answer, but as a project team, we respond to those. Now, we know that not all of the wants and wishes of each individual are going to be met, but we will do our greatest effort.
It taken down to the lowest common denominator instead of it always being top up.
Yes.
Make it top down.
Real quick, just to let you know, 5 of those members on that list are rank and call rank and file.
Okay, so that's why I asked, because you know who they are, and
We
you're
understand.
still calling them manager. Thank you, Dan.
Next slide, right? So here in front of you, you see our 4.7 acres that we're working with. As John mentioned, these facilities ideally fit on an 8 to 10 acre site. So Commissioner McGriff, to answer some of your questions about the land use challenges we face, one of the big things we face is landscaping and parking, common issues in these developments. Landscaping, our city code requires 15% of our site to be landscaped. What you see in front of us does not meet that. But what you do see here is a lot of the existing site we're proposing to maintain. There are a few major changes, most of which happens along First Street, the street frontage, but the rest of the site is primarily how it sits today.
Yeah, day-to-day storage, circulation, parking, that's the challenges we have with this. So.
Next slide. So here in front of you, you see our conceptual office layout. Part of that effort in evaluating the existing building was making sure that the current program will not only fit in the existing building, but will fit in a way that makes sense when we look at these types of facilities and office spaces. So what you see here shows to my left, level 1, it's about 13,000 square feet and change. We proposed to house the entire operations group and parks and maintenance on the first floor. We will provide a locker room facility and a large staff hall with a kitchen. On the second floor, we provide space for all of engineering's group. And you can see here that both floors would have a lobby. That's the tannish color, if you will, that is connected through an atrium space. Then you can also see on the level 2, we're proposing to build out only 11,000 square feet of this building, which means we're holding about 2,600 square feet in our pocket for future expansion, projected growth over the next 30, 40 years.
I'll just add that Chief Band may not be aware, but we're taking the lockers from the PD and reutilising them here. So.
Hey, just one question. So this laundry wet storage, what's that all about?
So as you're aware, the operation guys are out in the field, so there's potential daily for these guys and women to get dirty.
Talking like a mud room.
Mud room, yes. So when they come back at the end of their day, we want to provide amenities for them to clean themselves off outside the building, and then once they come in, provide amenities for them to wash their clothes, hang their wet items in a separate area that allows for them to dry.
So do we not use a service like, one of the laundry services?
We do, but this is more like rain gear, heavy rain gear. I don't know if you've been to operations, but we have a unique system there where rain gear comes in, it's hanging everywhere, and lots of times they'll pull it up into the kind of the airspace above where it's right in front of a heater and it blows on it. So this would be an area for that kind of gear, wet boots to dry.
Okay, thanks.
One point I like to make is they're not wearing rain gear all of the time, throughout the entire year. So a lot of times their coveralls and stuff are receiving the dirt and the contaminants. So we want to make sure they have the ability to get rid of that before they come, deep into the building.
So why do we have 2 lobbies?
You have 2 lobbies, one for operations and one for engineering.
Well, I can see that, but why?
It doesn't make sense to consolidate them at this point. Operations really doesn't have that day-to-day public entity coming in, engaging them. Engineering does. And so though it's not to the degree that engineering sees, they do have onesie-twosie people here and there. So we need that counter space for them, and we want them separated so that it's easy in terms of wayfinding for the public to come in, and it's also easy for the work that needs to happen at those reception counters.
That was very perceptive on your part, because that was a question I brought up at the meeting. Why do we have 2 lobbies, and then why do we have 2? They're listed as receptionists.
Well, and I think there's also 2 kitchens. Why do we need 2 kitchens in a facility this size?
Kitchen would be a term I would use loosely. So we have a kitchen on the ground floor, which gives the group the ability to cook food prep in case of an emergency. If they have a late night event and they need to be on site, we want to make sure they have the ability to do that. The kitchen that you see on the second floor is a coffee bar. So a place for a coffee pot, a small fridge, so that staff doesn't have to go downstairs throughout the day.
I might suggest relabeling that.
The women's locker room needs to be the same size as the men's locker room.
So we are working through these kind of things right now. Those are some of the comments that came back. This is indicative of where we are at this point in time. This is by no means the final product.
Just making a note.
Valid point.
Moving on.
Here you see the conceptual plan for the warehouse. So as we mentioned, most of the warehouse in green is going to be used for storage, materials and equipment. The blue indicates where the fleet maintenance facility would be developed. The main goal here is to provide a drive-through facility for fleet maintenance. No in and out, no driving in and backing out. As you can see here, this is our proposed layout. We would provide some additional ramping on the exterior of the building to create that drive-through, that loop through the building.
This next slide is just a breakdown of how we've allocated your 11.4 million. So you'll see there that the construction is 8.9. That's what we're holding the architect and the contractor to, as much as the dismay about it. The other allocations of funds are permits, obviously, professional services, third-party contracts for fit-out, furniture, that kind of thing. Furniture, we're trying to utilise, again, as much as that's in storage in the city right now. We're a little bit ways off what those final numbers will come back at, but the target over the next number of months is to dive into that, along with the design when we can figure out the floor spaces and the number of occupants and tables, chairs, that kind of thing. So. Project milestones, so you'll see we're into February. We're almost at the end of our schematic design, the first stage design. We'll be issuing a package, I believe, on the 24th of February to the contractor to price. So 3 weeks after that, we should have some costs, 2 weeks actually, cost confirmation back from them. Then working down the rest of this kind of slide, you see we've got public hearings, public involvement, targeted building permit. GMP we're hoping to have set roughly around the end of July, beginning of August, and then into construction on a 12.5-month program right now based on our current design. Obviously we're trying to better that, but that's what we're forecasting right now. Our last slide is just the next kind of steps for us. So I mentioned currently at 50%, but we're working towards 100% schematic in the next couple of weeks. Again, continuing to discuss the parking, site efficiencies, landscaping, which we have got good information on. Office efficiencies, I think that's what's going to be key to this. Again, that's part of our remit for the next couple of months as we work through the design. We will keep the commission, through Mr. O'Donnell, updated on progress. And I think we have a neighbourhood presentation coming up in March. Yeah.
Correct.
So,
Just one?
Yes, ma'am.
Just one so far, I think.
About the CIC?
I'll probably do that myself, yeah.
Is that for Gaffney Lane neighborhood, or is that like an
Yes.
open house, like what we had before?
It's both the same thing. It's an open house, but for the residents in the vicinity along Gaffney Lane.
So it's an open house at the First Street location, not a Gaffney Lane neighborhood meeting?
No, my understanding is it's a Gaffney Lane neighborhood meeting is what we're showing on the site, or on the schedule. As far as an open house, another open house on the site, we haven't.
I was just wondering what the neighborhood.
Yeah, we haven't planned that.
Yeah.
I noticed on here you've got new Oregon City Public Works signage at First Street. So there's a really nice, wonderful sign at the current site that kind of matches some of the other stuff. Are you looking at reusing that? I'd hate to see that get tossed.
We haven't asked that question, but we can look at that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Any questions for us?
Okay. So thanks. I look forward to as we move forward, and I have every confidence that you're going to run this as well as you're running the police station.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. With that, we're adjourned. We'll come back at 10 after.